Last time on the Kaiju Apostle podcast.
And it turns out that's not part of Egyptian mythology. That's part of Yu-Gi-Oh mythology.
Oh, there was that gas leak last year.
Oh, don't blame it all on a gas leak.
I never thought I'd ever say this sentence on this podcast. I was watching a great TikTok about this type of thing.
Well, so something I did think about now that we're going into Cain and Abel, when I was looking through the ancient Christian commentary.
You were able to find it?
No, I wasn't. But
so you cannot find it? I don't like Sanda. It's coarse and rough and irritating.
Bye!
Welcome back to the Kaiju Apostle podcast, a deep dive into Toho's rich history of monster films and discovering what lies beneath the surface. My name's Chris, and I'm here with my co-hosts, the gallant and the courtly Sir David.
Ooh, gallant. I don't even think my wife's called me that before.
You're the knight in Monty Python Who Runs Away. So it's good to be back.
Yeah, it is good to be back. We've actually had a few people tell us that. It's like, hey, it's good to have you guys back in the rotation and not just filler episodes. So,
well, thank you, these strange internet people.
But we really haven't actually had a chance to talk much today. How are you doing, Chris?
Well, let's see. Week 15 of shutdowns.
Yeah.
It's been great. As much as working from home, it's been nice. It's kind of nice to be reopening and being outside when it's actually okay to be outside. So,
yeah.
How are you in the same pandemic we are all facing?
I'm pooped, man. Like, being a parent was tough, and you throw another kid in, and a kid that needs a lot of help,
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's a lot.
No,
but
I don't know.
We're good. I know. You're being nice. I appreciate it. But we've been getting some good feedback. It's weird. Like, we just released an episode yesterday, and then we're already recording an episode today because of how off our schedule is. So this is strange. Like, for some reason, my brain isn't able to process this. But we've been getting some really good feedback on the past few episodes so far, and we wanted to share some of that because we've had some questions that have been asked. And that was a horrible segue. So with
transition.
Oh man, it's John Mulaney's segues are the best though. So with the building a bridge episode, I've had a few people message me, and one person in particular was, hey, the first time I listened, I just found myself wanting to correct everything, but, and then they went back and re-listened, and they felt like their defenses were down, and they're able to really hear what Faye and I were trying to say. And that isn't me trying to say like what was discussed is this like an errant piece of truth, and if you disagree with us, then but it's really just, I think some of the message we've been getting has solidified the fact that for a lot of people, what's been happening over the past few weeks has really like shaken the core foundation of what a lot of people thought was true, right?
Mm-hmm.
Just this trust in law enforcement. Because I mean, I've even seen people who are, I would say would be considered quite far on the right without being like alt-right, right? Quite. And even they are like, yeah, no, we need more police oversight. Like they never really saw these instances so explicitly, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, I see a lot of people that are just starting to kind of have this process, and I just say that because it's really easy to assume people are just going to be quote unquote woke, right?
Mm-hmm.
We just want them to be at this point. We're not willing to give people a chance to actually have these conversations and grow. And it's not that, I just want to encourage people that it's not that you're not taking these things seriously. Like, you need to hold people accountable, but like, we also need to give people the chance to be able to grow and change too. I feel like sometimes it's hard when things are so volatile right now, right? Because we want everybody to be on the same page. But I just personally have had some really good conversations as a result of that. And that's just kind of what I wanted to share, some encouragement, being like, hey, if you, there's a difference between someone, I saw this earlier, between someone like stumbling and making mistakes, and then you have a difference between someone who's just straight up ignorant, right?
Mhm.
Like we need to have grace for the people who are making mistakes but trying. But the people who are just so hateful and ignorant, like love them, but might be good to kind of create some distance right now too. You know,
Right.
there's
That's the difference. There's grace, but grace doesn't mean completely absolving people from change. Like we can hold
Mhm.
people's feet to the fire in terms of making changes to their mindsets without, and you can say like, oh, okay, you can't, that was a microaggression or something like that.
Yeah.
Grace does not mean not doing that, but it means um, calling him out, but also like working with them. And I think that's kind of what we're hoping as two white guys who pretty much know probably a majority of white people. That's going to be a lot of what our work is helping keep ourselves educated, helping others get educated, and using our positions of power as leverage for other people with power to say like, whoa, you can't do that anymore. Here's why. And kind of alleviating some of that
Yeah.
stress that's been laid down previously.
Absolutely. And I know that's kind of been a point of contention for a lot of people too, is the idea of powers and oppression and subjugation, all these words that they consider to be a liberal view of the world or whatever it is, right? And I think people are there's and this specifically Christians are scared to take these ideas that they're like, well, it's not in the Bible, right? Or whatever argument they may have, which it's easy to dismiss that. But as anyone who holds any ideology, you want to keep your ideology as pure to the tenets of your belief as possible, right?
Mhm.
But then it's kind of the argument of, well, some Christians were Platonists, some Christians were, they followed Aristotle, right? I mean, no one, we've talked about this, no one doesn't have a bias. So,
Mhm.
you could say, well, this person believes in what's considered like critical race theory, and that's not in the Bible. I'm like, okay, but you also believe in capitalism, and that's not in the Bible either, right? So it's like we could do this all day.
Right.
And that's so let's not do that and let's actually deal with the root of the matter.
Especially for us as, I mean, for religious people in general, but also as like people who consume a lot of fiction, we know, I mean, we should be conditioned to see the world as a place that can be full of failure, a place that's full of evil.
Mhm.
I mean, especially like the film we're getting into tonight, and some of the ones that we've done previously where we learned that corporations can themselves commit great acts of evil. It's hard to think that there's any religious system, whether explicitly religious or not, that doesn't have categories for evil and systemic evil. So
Yeah.
why in the real world is it hard to accept when we can accept these villains in fiction? It's an interesting dissonance.
So I wanted to share some feedback as well, with our last episode as well, War of the Gargantuas. So very surprised at how much you guys enjoyed the conversation on the analysis of the films and kind of where we're coming from. I mean, obviously, Chris, you and I enjoy it, but we weren't really sure how that would, how that translate for other people.
Right.
Sorry, I'm gonna
Oh.
insert rim shot there. Um, but we had a couple questions that we just thought we'd answer really quick before getting into the movie this night, the movie tonight. Oh wow! So the first question comes from Nathan, old Zimzilla. So he asked, since you guys talked about analyzing a film through a translation and what you bring from your own background, what's your take on a translation when that is all that's left of a film? Would you say then that the film's true meaning will be forever lost? So I wanted to let you answer that one, Chris.
Oh, thank you. Um, I would say, like, in terms of, like, in general, no. If we have someone who knows what the original film was,
Hmm.
like, you talk about oral traditions of the Gospels or how a lot of Jewish traditions are passed down orally. Like, there's been a lot of study about how oral traditions, especially in like native cultures and in East Asian cultures, there's oral traditions that are super like resource or not super transmittable and they're reliable. That's what I was looking for. So if someone knows it and can pass it along, it's not lost. Or
Yeah.
if someone even wrote in a book or like a promo material. This is what the meaning of the movie is. I don't think it's lost. We may lose the authority to say the movie says this and I can prove it, but it's not necessarily lost. But the version you're watching, if it's a translation, I would say does not wholly carry the 100% original meaning.
Yeah. Unless, yeah, and that's even if they did the best translation ever. You know, you still, like we talked about last week, there's a certain element where when you translate one thing from another, you are committing some form of violence on that, right?
Yeah.
Which we did have someone ask about that as well. So how would you define violence in that context when Gadamir talks about how so what was it? All interpretation?
Yeah, all translation is interpretation, and
yeah.
all interpretation is violence. And really, I think violence sounds like a strong term. One, because in general, we only ascribe the word violence to like physicality, and we don't think about it in terms of emotion or spiritual damage. But violence in this sense just means it's been changed, and generally, you could even say it's against the author's will that it's been changed. They might have like okayed the translation as if many writers have that much control over their published work. But even with their okay of you translating, it's still changing it and it's still taking it away from what they said. So you are, by definition, when you translate, changing, like almost putting words, meanings, and ideas in the author's mouth that they weren't necessarily going for when they originally wrote that.
Yeah.
So
like what we saw with War of the Gargantuas, right? There was no intent to have not really a lesson, but the Adam and I did it again. See,
again,
the Cain and Abel. So, but that's it. I mean, you're looking at War of the Gargantuas, for example, right? So Honda and everyone else didn't mean to talk about Cain and Abel, but the American production company or whoever did the subtitles, I mean, that's what they did. Or not the subtitles, when they dubbed the voices, that's what they did. That's not genuine to the film at all. Now, you might make the argument of you could see it, but is that an accurate way to translate and interpret the film? Which, again, that was the point.
Yeah.
But I would say, in a sense, yeah, that's violence. He completely took what was said there and changed it to something entirely different.
Especially since we can say that a Cain and Abel reference is, like I think we said this, just a contextual that we don't know if the Cain and Abel story is really that deep in Japanese cultural significance that it would come up every time brothers fight.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, well, let's go ahead and get into tonight's movie. We are discussing Ebirah, Horror of the Deep, released on December 17th, 1966. It's all cold in December, but we're going to go to the island and have a fun time. I've got nothing really witty to say, but Chris, if you'd like to do the plot summary for us, that would be wonderful.
So, yeah. So just when you thought it was safe to go back in the... Hey, I think we already did this. So let's do this. When Ryota loses his brother at sea and tries to take matters into his own hands, he ends up on the journey of a lifetime. With his new friends Nida and Ichino in tow, they end up breaking into a yacht, only to find criminal mastermind Yoshimura, played by the enigmatic Akira Takarada. The ship ends up crashing on Lechi, or the Devil's Island, thanks to a giant Kaiju crustacean, Ebirah. They discover the terrorist organization called the Red Bamboo has enslaved a handful of Infant Island natives for their nefarious schemes, namely making a bunch of yellow Jeeps to keep old Ebi away. Also on the island is Daio, portrayed by Kumi Mitsuno, another Infant Island native, and not only do they discover Ryota's brothers on Infant Island, but the Devil's Island also has another occupant, Godzilla. Whoa.
Whoa.
Between a sleeping giant, seafood to die for, and a bunch of dapper terrorists, our protagonists find themselves between a rock and a hard place. Thankfully, Ryota and Yada reunite, and Godzilla turns up the heat on Ebirah, but not before Ebirah takes out the entire Red Bamboo organization in one fell swoop. Oh, yeah, and there's a tacked on message about the dangers of atomic bombs. But I think we're getting into that later, right?
Yep.
We'll
Awesome.
spend more time on it than they did.
Yeah. Yes, we will. Awesome. Thanks, Chris. So I would say this is our introduction to Jun Fukuda as director, but as we see, that's not necessarily the case with these films so far. The script was written by Shinichi Sekizawa. Tomoyuki Tanaka was the producer. So coming back to do music was Masaru Sato. So I don't know if you remember, he's the one that did the music for Godzilla Raids Again. So kind of how it was a little bit more unique with that film. But he was pretty much the favorite, his go-to guy for Akira Kurosawa. So that's why it's a little bit of a different feel, but I personally like Sato's scores, especially in this film. It's a lot of fun. Kazuo Yamada was in charge of cinematography, and then, Eiji Tsuburaya, as always, was director of special effects. Cast-wise, I felt like this is probably one of the best lineups we've had in a while. So Akira Takarada plays Yoshimura, the thief. You may remember him as actually one of the in the original Godzilla film, he was in the love triangle, and honestly, I feel like he's come such a long way since that movie too. Then we have Kumi Mizuno as Dio, Toru Watanabe as Ryota, and then Hideo Sunazuka as Nita. So in the group of people, he's the guy in the brown hoodie. Shotaro Togen as Ichino, so he's the one wearing the yellow jacket. And then we have Toru Ibuki as Yada, that is Ryota's brother. And then Akihiko Harada as the Red Bamboo Captain. It's kind of weird seeing Dr. Sarazawa back with an eye patch, but here we are. And then, wait, he didn't have an eye patch in this one, did he? Yeah, he did. Okay. And then Jun Tazaki as the Red Bamboo Base Commander. Hideo Amamoto as the Red Bamboo Captain. We're actually going to see him in a future film that King Kong Escapes. He's the main bad guy in that movie.
Oh, a King Kong movie that actually came out?
Yeah. Huh. And then, unfortunately, the Peanuts do not return as the Shobijin. It's a pair Bambi. I don't really have much information on them. And then Haru Nakajima plays Godzilla and also an infant islander. And then we have Hiroshi Sakita as Ebirah. Okay, so a little bit of trivia here. So I said, this was not technically Jun Fukuda's introduction into the series, because he was actually Ishiro Honda's assistant on Rodan. I did not know that.
Okay.
So it wasn't his first kaiju film. This also would not be the first time Fukuda worked with both Takarada and Harada. They both starred in the movie 100 Shot, 100 Killed, which was a spoof of the James Bond series. Sato also took a few themes and cues from this movie, being 100 Shot, 100 Killed, and reused them in Ebirah. There was other actors that came from that movie to this one as well, but I didn't want to list all of those out. Those were the more prominent ones. So, okay. Chris, I told you I was going to surprise you this episode, right?
Uh-huh.
So, as a lot of the listeners probably know, Godzilla wasn't the original monster to fight Ebirah. It was really supposed to be King Kong.
Oh.
Yeah. So that's why we see a lot of similarities between the 1933 film and King Kong vs. Godzilla, including Godzilla finding strength through electricity.
Uh-huh.
Godzilla's focus on a woman character, right? Uh-huh. And just overall, the fact that all the monsters in these films have no powers at all. It would have fit perfectly for King Kong.
Interesting.
Right. Yeah, I thought you would find that intriguing.
He was just going to be locked in that mountain too?
Yeah. Yeah, pretty much.
Okay, sure.
Yeah. And I would love to throw this out there for anyone who knows. My thought about this is I get that they couldn't do it because of rights and stuff, but in my head, I'm kind of wouldn't you change the plot to accommodate the monsters instead of just throwing them in there? But I don't know how far along in the process they were, right? So that's where I'm I get it, but it's strange to me that you wouldn't have changed really anything. So, I did say that E.G. Tsuburaya was in charge of special effects, right?
Indeed.
Technically, though, he only gets an honorary credit here because he was really focused on War of the Gargantuas. I did not find who was actually in charge of the special effects and all that. So I'm sure someone will correct me on that.
Twitter, hurry. So
Twitter
wrong on the internet.
Twitter mob assemble.
And like and share while you're here.
Right. So it's the same Godzilla suit as Invasion of Astro Monster, which is why it looks so ratty. And fun
He
fact.
was in a mountain. Excuse you.
Yeah. And fun fact, Fukuda is on record later in his life saying that between crippled by an incredibly reduced budget and thinking the original never should have had a sequel, he's not a fan of the Godzilla movies he made, which is a shame. So, we did our poll this week. Is probably my favorite poll we've done so far. So Chef Godzilla comes to your table and asks how you would like your Ebirah prepared. You answer. So we had 4 options: garlic and butter, tempura, Cajun seasoning, and vegetarian. So Biollante, please. Which, Chris, that's, you guys will find out, a plant monster down the road. Yeah. So garlic and butter won with 26 votes. So 46% of the votes. Tempura got 11 votes. Cajun seasoning got 13, and vegetarian only got 6.
I'm so alone here.
I know. I was gonna say sorry, man.
And I wasn't even one of those 6 because I'm not throwing off the results of our own poll.
Yeah, I totally would have voted for Cajun myself.
Cooked by atomic breath.
Man, I seriously love Cajun food though. It's so good. Okay. So before we get in, let's do our Twitter conversation. I asked, with Ebirah, Horror of the Deep, we find the first non-Honda helmed Godzilla film since Godzilla Raids Again, and it shows. Do you feel having Fukuda take the reins was a good move? Or did the series go down the wrong path without Honda? So before I read some answers, Chris, you know the drill. What did you think before going into this? And how do you feel about the film? How would you answer those questions?
So I'm looking at the picture you posted on this tweet, and Godzilla's tail is in between his shoulder blades on it. So I think we need to post this one in the show notes if we can.
That's the Criterion cover too. That's awesome.
Oh no, Criterion. Let's see what the HBO one is. It'll be glowing blue Godzilla. Anyway, so I'll kind of answer these in a little different order. So it definitely takes a noticeable shift when you compare it to the other Honda ones, but I don't feel like it's big like Godzilla Raids Again. But in general, I think if you lose the original director, I don't think that means you have to end the series. So I don't know I wouldn't say it went down the wrong path. I just think that we might start seeing it get executed a little more poorly than it could. I mean, it's not as if every single one we've watched so far has had like an amazing plot. It's not an amazing moral message or thesis statement. But if it doesn't pick up a little bit, I could see why some people would complain. But I'm also watching these in release order compared to the new ones first. So I'm a little biased in that sense. But in terms of like, what did I expect? I feel like we're in no Chris land. I have no expectations. I have no idea. The first thing that I think about almost any of these films is the thumbnail when you're trying to stream it. And so I'm like, this one's got a shrimp in it. Interesting. So I truly like some of these. I think I said this with the Invasion, that I've like heard of it, but had no concept of what it is. This one, if you didn't say Ebirah again before I read the thing, I would have probably been like, oh crap, how do you say this again? Like, I'm just so unfamiliar with it.
Yeah.
So I came in with nothing. I came into this world naked, and I will leave it. No, but in terms of knowing that it went to a different director afterwards, I think I felt it. Not in a huge, substantial, this is the end of Godzilla way, but
Mm-hmm.
you feel the tonal shift. And if we're being totally honest, I'm about to get like blocked and unfollowed by so many people right now. I kind of don't mind the tonal shift. I'm okay that it kind of picked up a little bit because I'm so used to like Toku kind of leaning into the campiness.
Mm-hmm.
So like as I watch more Kamen Rider, as I watch more Sentai, I'm getting used to people saying like these are people in rubber suits. We got to play this up a little bit. So I've kind of appreciated the lighter tone.
Yeah, and so I think there's two factors without like being completely wrong about the history, because I know this is where people can get really sensitive about stuff. Be like,
Mhm.
no, that's not actually how it happened. So if I had two guesses, one is the fact that this wasn't supposed to be a Godzilla movie.
Yeah.
So obviously it's going to feel different. But I think once the movie actually happened, my guess is Toho looked at this and they're like, okay, maybe we're onto something, right? Like, I don't know how it did financially, but
Mhm.
if you get butts in the seat, if you get people caring about it again, that's kind of the goal, right? So,
Yeah, exactly.
so I think that's part of it. But then something to remember too is by this point, Ultraman would have already been on TV for months now.
Sure.
So stuff like that. I mean, Gamera would have already had at least two films by this point. So the whole landscape of not only tokusatsu, but just kaiju related material is a lot different than even 5, 6 years ago at this point, right? Now we're kind of
Right.
almost like it's this boom to the extent that it becomes oversaturated. Um,
Yeah, I could see
so
that.
yeah, so I think big part of it though is the shift is it wasn't supposed to be a Godzilla film, but then it starts leaning into that more and more and more, and eventually you're just like, okay, well, this is where we're at. But the consensus, I mean, almost every single reply we got,
Wait, before you get into Twitter,
yeah,
so this is I just for the viewers at home, I haven't heard any of these responses because I'm trying to avoid spoilers, right? But I do want to say quick that this one felt like it was the first really good way to get kids into the Godzilla franchise again,
mhm.
without having him dab or send a message on Fortnite. Like I thought this was a good way to kind of tone it down kid wise without kidifying it. You know what I mean? Does that make sense?
Press F for respects.
But I want to put this out here as the hook for people to keep listening. I have a question based on what you just said that I think after our discussion I want to revisit
Okay,
and maybe even pose it to the listeners. So when David gives an answer you don't like, tweet at him.
please,
Okay,
please
sorry.
do.
Now back to the Twitter comments
No, you're good. You're
from
good,
our lovely and not lovely followers.
man. Apart from like the life coach people that I still don't get why you're following us, like we have awesome followers. So, but yeah, I mean, honestly, we've got some. I don't think anyone replied to this tweet without saying that. I mean, everyone likes this movie for the most part. It doesn't mean that it's a perfect movie. It doesn't mean that it's the best, but I don't know what this guy's name is or girl. I don't know. Okay, he's a guy. I'm looking at his profile here. But he just said Ebirah effing slaps, right? So he goes on, talks about that. Obviously, Never Fate says the loss of the deeper themes from earlier works is something I miss in the Fukuda helmed entries, but I adore Ebirah, Horror of the Deep. Great adventure movie with fun characters. Akira Takarada plays my all-time favorite human character in the franchise here as a master thief. And then we go on to Andrew Roebuck. Says, I love Ebirah Horror of the Deep. It's an absolute blast and feels like a giant monster beach party. While, of course, lacking the depth of many Honda features, it is hard to beat in terms of just being an incredibly fun adventure movie. And then lastly, we have Faye, who, if you've listened to her past few episodes, you know who that is. she says it's a good move since it let the franchise flourish and do unique things. And I feel like that really sums it up, right? You look at this movie, to me, it's not a perfect movie, but whereas War of the Gargantuas, it had some fun monster action, but just the human characters were not compelling whatsoever. And it when your humans aren't interesting, it's hard to keep it go. It's hard for me to keep going because that's the thrust of the movie, right? So I'm like, it feels like a slog. Whereas with this one, the monster action was fun. Like Ebirah as a monster on paper sounds like the most boring kaiju in the world. It's just a giant shrimp, right? Lobster, crab, whatever you want to call it. But it's also one of the best looking suits that we've seen to date. Like how intricate it is, all the details. Like they clearly put a lot of time and attention into it. But not only, is the monster action fun, but the characters like actually care about them, right? Like they actually give them, it's not like this deep introspective dive into, the depravity of man or anything there's nothing in that capacity, but you have characters who are charismatic. You have characters who make funny jokes, we'll talk about it later, but one of my favorite lines in this movie is when Dio says, Mothra is sleeping, but once our prayers reach her, she's sure to wake and come save us. And then the character is like, you should have set an alarm clock. And I just, every time I lose it. It's so good. So I'm like, there's just this writing that Sekizawa has that, Kimura is a great writer, don't get me wrong, but just the humor in this film is just, because even Takarada's character, he's just like, you guys have your girlfriends and I've got my lock picking. It's just simple things like that. I don't know. I have such a fun time watching this movie. And really, even more than even like Frankenstein Conquers the World, like this is one of the first films we've watched since, really the only film we've watched since Invasion of Astro Monster where I'm like, I actually care about the people on the screen, right?
Yeah, it definitely had a few more of those little moments that let them kind of just develop a bit of a personality without going too deep, but just those little throwaway lines are really kind of the core at building up a character, is giving them just a little bit to talk about like that.
Yeah.
But yeah, and I don't know. I think if you're like Faye says, if this is where the franchise takes the springboard into new directions, I'm okay with some growing pains. Like this wasn't an entirely bad movie. I think a lot of the comments that I'm scanning over quickly call it fun. And for a movie that's a transition movie, fun is a lot of what you can ask for.
Yeah.
We've seen some truly bad movies like at the in-between where it's trying to figure out where it's going. Like the MCU, I know, cheap potshot, I know. But if your movie, if the worst thing you'd say about the movie was, well, it's fun, you still did all right.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's one of those things where unfortunately, like with Godzilla Raids Again, I want to go back and revisit it, but to me, it's just not a fun movie, right?
Yeah.
It's not one that I'm like, oh, I really want to watch that again. The majority of people who do want to watch it, it's because of the Godzilla and Anguirus fight, which I get that. But, there's some human elements there that are interesting, but as a whole, it's you're talking about growing pains. Like that's like 6-month-old teething growing pains. It's just screaming the worst thing ever. You lose sleep over it. But in this situation, yeah, you're right. It's fun. And Alex I don't remember if it was on his own podcast or they were talking about, he was on another one for Monsters vs. Men, is he was saying like for him, the biggest sin a movie could commit is not being fun. And I don't necessarily agree with that, or being enjoyable, right? And I don't think I agree with that. Movies like Bong Joon-ho's Mother, like it's one of the best movies I've ever seen. I did not enjoy a single moment of it, and I never want to watch it again.
Yeah, exactly.
But as a whole, I agree with that. If I'm not enjoying myself, I wouldn't say it's a good movie, right? I've warmed up to King of the Monsters because of that, where I'm like, I'm having fun in spite of what frustrates me. So I'm like, if I can have fun watching this movie, I would say it's at least doing something.
Yeah. I'm the lowest common denominator when it comes to movie criticism or what movies I enjoy or not. But I could easily say personally that a fun movie just covers many sins. And if I'm having a blast, I don't really care about some of the problems. Like, you want to talk about a movie riddled with problems, you can say Solo is
Mm-hmm.
technically should be a bad movie, but it's fun and I enjoy myself every time I watch it. But I also know that there are movies that are objectively good, like Parasite, that I'm like, I should love this. I mean, this is a great movie, but I'm bored. So
Yeah.
I don't know. I'm lowbrow when it comes to that. So all these great like Cannes Film Festival movies, I'm like, okay, is something gonna blow up? Because honestly, I need something to blow up. And I'm not talking about relationships blowing up. I'm talking about fire.
Yeah. That's funny you say that about Solo, though, because I would rewatch Solo over Rise of Skywalker any day of the week.
Well, Rise of Skywalker has the double whammy of being both bad and not fun. So
I know. Like, I'm so glad we got to hang out for that. But like, if it wasn't, that was your nephew, right? Or your
cousin.
cousin? Okay, I can't
Yeah.
remember. If it wasn't for your cousin, like, I would have been so miserable. But seeing him have the time of his life, that kind of redeemed it for me.
See, and if it was fun for him, it was fun for someone, and it's forgivable there. But
Yeah,
yeah,
we could go on about that.
we could, but that's the thing. I mean, but remember we filmed the White Behemoth episode right after
Mhm.
with Gamera and the Space Women, which is what I call the movie because I can't remember what it's actually called.
That should actually be the name. So at the end of this episode, there will be a link for a change.org petition. So we're going to change Gamera Super Monster to Gamera and the Space Women.
Yeah, that's right. So, but Gamera and the Space Women, like, I had fun with that one, and I mean,
Yeah.
it could have been because we were together, and it could have been because, like, what the heck is this movie? And so yeah, I mean, fun covers so many sins, and this one is kind of that. So
Yeah, I've actually had starting to watch the Gamera films on my own, and I still, as bad as it sounds, Gamera Super Monster is the worst movie I've seen in this whole series, everything we've been doing. And I've had more fun watching that than the other Gamera films. I'm like, I don't know what that says.
yeah,
But yeah, I think something that's just really interesting about this movie is like there's no heavy-handed themes, right? It's not a sci-fi flick. It's not some philosophical or ethical discussion really about anything, right? I mean, you could talk about, well, maybe it touches on slavery, right? Because you have the infant island natives and
yeah,
they I do like the whole subversive nonviolent resistance, right? The whole like, hey, we're gonna take all these fruits and take them out and replace them with the leaves. So then when they use the mist against Ebirah, it doesn't do anything. I was like, oh, that's actually really clever. I like that,
Yeah.
right? I don't know what it is about Sekizawa and colored liquids. It just seems like all of his movies have that, but it's not red this time, so that's good.
Mhm.
But
The bamboo is.
touche. But yeah, we don't really have the typical things that we've come to expect in a Godzilla film, and just ultimately I'm okay with that.
Yeah, same.
Because really what's so funny is it's not that we don't want to discuss anything, there's just not a whole lot here. But again, compared to War of the Gargantuans, I'm fine with that because it didn't try to say anything, in my opinion.
Yeah, that's a perfect way to sum it up.
Yeah.
Like, I felt like War of the Gargantuans it wanted something to come out, but we clearly, if you've listened to the episode, know we struggled.
Yeah. And there's definitely things you can take away from it, right? This idea of, War of the Gargantuans, this idea of trying to, the idea of warring brothers, how do you make peace, all this stuff. And I've seen people make those arguments, but it's not explicit, right? And that's the whole point. This podcast wouldn't exist if there weren't implicit things. But I feel like there's a difference between trying to say something and then just falling on your face. And then this one here, they just really aren't trying to say anything. And that's okay. I mean, Jun Fukuda is clearly a comedy and action director, and it did really well because of it. So getting back to that Twitter post though, Chris, I mean, do you feel like compared to what we've seen before, was this the route the movies needed to go? And do you feel like this disrespects the original and what Honda tried to do with these movies? Because I think the reality needs to be said that the original is what it is.
Yep.
And once Toho smelled blood in the water, you're going to lose any form of just trying to say something. Right now,
Yep.
there's the profitability, and I mean that's just, it's inevitable. And there's no director that is always going to just, I just want to be this prophetic voice in the wilderness, right? Even Spike Lee is still trying to make money, right? Spike Lee still has people sign his checks. So I think we have to remember that. So again, is this the route the movies needed to go? And do you feel like this does disrespect the original?
Well, let me be pedantic and say didn't need to go. No, because I know, but we didn't need any more. Just like we didn't need any more Star Wars or Ghostbusters. So
Indiana Jones.
Yeah, well, but like, did it need to go? Did it need to change if it was going to continue? I'll stop being pedantic now. I'll play along. If it was going to continue past the past couple we've seen, did it need to change? As a 27-year-old in 2020, yeah, I don't know how much of the same ones I could have put up with. And I say put up as if I haven't been enjoying myself, but I feel like if we had too many that were closer in tone to War for the Gargantuas, trying to say something but not, I think that would have really worn me down. And probably it would have worn down the original audiences too. And especially when you think of how does any franchise survive, it needs to aim younger without being insulting to the older. It needed to tone down age-wise pretty soon. And I think this is a good way to do it without, sometimes in like Sentai, for example, if they needed to tone the age down, they would add an actual child who would become one of the Power Rangers. Like they did that. They didn't need to go that way. So I think this was a good direction. As for, was it disrespectful to the original movie? Absolutely, because this is a capitalist invention on what was a prophetic message has now become part of a capitalist money-making machine. If you think of like, again, to bring up Rise of Skywalker again, they continue to beat this rotting, decayed, dead horse. Like, corporations are going to do the path of least resistance to make the path of most money. So if it means not having a thesis statement but still releasing a movie, absolutely, I think anybody's capable of doing that. Now, does it, if it's disrespectful in a capitalist sense, do I think it's wrong for the series to give up on thesis statements? No. I think we see that with the MCU. Again, another easy contemporary choice, but like, you've got the big Avengers movies and you've just got other movies along the way. I don't see that as a bad way to keep it alive. Like, am I going to say Fukuda was a bad guy for making these? No, absolutely not. I think he knew what he was playing, and I think Fukuda knew the world he was playing around in and worked well within it. Yeah. And we know from his way, I mean, you've already said that he thought the first one didn't need sequels. So to whatever extent his hands were tied in making this, we know that there was at least an awareness of what he was doing. Yeah. So I'm not going to ascribe any evils to it. And even I'm being sort of cheeky by saying it is disrespectful, but that is from a money-making corporate sense compared to the movie itself is not a slap on the face to fans. And if people take the tonal shift as such, I disagree. That's a nice way I'll put that.
I think for me, and we kind of talked about this on the phone the other night, there's a subset of the fandom where when they discuss the movies by era, right? Showa, Heisei, Millennium, etc. They lump everything together as if all these movies feel and look the same. And they really don't. It's this categorization that ultimately is actually very arbitrary. We'll discuss that down the road. But when you have movies like Gojira and King Kong vs. Godzilla being able to inhabit the same space, clearly it's not because of the tone, right? It's just because of the proximity of each other. But I feel like this kind of movie, you have people who are just like, oh, the older movies are campy, they're silly and all that stuff. But like, that's not necessarily a bad thing. And the original, right? I mean, yes, it had a very deep message, but that's not why, to me, it's so good. Like, you look at the work that was actually done, it was so revolutionary. The acting is great, the music is great, the script is great, right? To me, that's why the original will be my favorite forever, because of the quality of what it is. Of course, yes, I love the message it has, but ultimately the message in any movie that I appreciate the most is Mothra vs. Godzilla. I actually think that's, the pinnacle Godzilla movie. So like, we look at this film here and it shouldn't be penalized because it's not the original, right? We do these things where we try to compare these. Well, it's not this or it's not that. It doesn't matter. Just judge it for what it is. But, in a way, I feel like Fukuda almost, and I don't know if it's really Fukuda, maybe it's Sekizawa, they have something at the end of the movie with the explosion and Mothra is taking them away, where there's this line that I feel like it's biting against this idea of every movie has to have a message. So our characters, it's one of the, I think, I'm trying to remember which one it was. I believe it was Achino, where he talks about, but this is not the end of atomic bombs. Let's hope they're used wisely or not at all. And then Takarada's character is like, thanks for the lecture, Professor. Right? Like, the movie hasn't really dealt with nuclear bombs much at all. And granted, yes, there's bombs on the island and all that, but like, it's really just in the context of Godzilla, because they recognize that the atomic bomb created Godzilla. It's just this, it doesn't really have a place in the movie. And then Takarada's character is like, yeah, okay, whatever. Like, that's not important right now. And in a way, I don't know if that was intentional, but I feel like that's so important to this, where it's like, just watch the movie for what it is. You don't necessarily have to have, this sermon with these movies. Like, I don't know if that's good or bad, but I feel like that's just kind of the route that we're going right now. And sometimes I feel like, when you're watching any form of, if it's a TV show or movie, sometimes we can strive so hard to find something that we're not being honest with what we're watching. We're kind of molding it into our own image, right? And yeah, be creative, sure. Like we have no problem doing that, but I'm not going to watch, Frankenstein Conquers the World and all of a sudden now I think it's some like, dissertation on the dangers of Marxism or anything like that. I mean, that would just be so disingenuous to the movie.
Right.
But as we saw, did it talk about the sanctity of human life? Yeah, it absolutely did. That's not a stretch.
Right. And that's going to be part of our job, is just saying what's a stretch, what's inherent, and keeping those separate. But I think part of maybe something we've kind of jumped over, maybe accidentally, is just like the tonal shift of Godzilla himself.
Yeah.
And the way he acted in the first and the way he is now. Like, the shift towards the heroic Godzilla happened, or at least a sympathetic Godzilla, happened a lot earlier than I thought it did. Because I know he was a tool of the military in the 2014 movie. But the question is, like, does all of the symbolism that was loaded into Godzilla and Gojira, does that still apply? Or do we kind of have to keep an open hand with that symbolism and just say, well, he's not really a nuclear allegory anymore?
Yeah. Do you think maybe that even has something to do with just like, obviously we're looking at 20 years removed at this point, not saying that people have accepted what's happened, but at a certain point, I mean, you kind of have to, you can't obviously go back and change anything, right? So maybe that's reflective of the attitude of just accepting what's happened and trying to move on. But, in this situation, it doesn't take away from the horror of what happened. But at a certain point, Miroslav Volf, the end of memory, he talks about the idea of remembering rightly. And at a certain point, you don't necessarily like forget forget in the sense of like this doesn't matter anymore, but to move on from trauma and from these moments, like there is a certain point where you do have to let go. So I don't know, is maybe that's reflective of their attitude of trying to, this is a new Japan where it's post-war, the horror that was the atomic bombs that's not important, but it's not as maybe drastic or in your face. And I'm not super familiar with the history, so I don't want to say yes or no, but I don't know.
Yeah.
Maybe that's something that someone could tease out more than we could.
Yeah, and I have no framework for figuring out what that looks like, what the communal healing from the trauma looks like. But I can say that it does seem like this heroic / sympathetic Godzilla does resonate, at least to some extent, and as much as you still see it later. Like, they don't reverse course and turn Godzilla back into a villain in the next film.
Yeah.
So there does seem to be something that either says audiences were fine with the transition of the allegory, or maybe they just didn't see him as that allegory anymore anyway. So I don't want to cling too tightly to something that maybe no one else did.
We really just need to blame this on King Kong.
Yeah.
This is all King Kong's fault.
I agree.
If
Just
it
like he got it delayed.
Yeah. It keeps getting delayed because he's just not quite ready for that fight
They should just
yet.
replace, in this next one, they should just replace King Kong with Godzilla like they did for this one.
Yeah. So Godzilla versus Godzilla?
Yeah. It's a fascinating introspective look on Godzilla and his inner demons.
Okay. I will say though, we're talking about how there really isn't a whole lot to be said. I did find something interesting though. So in light of kind of what's been happening in our country over the past few weeks, I was really starting to think about the concept of prayer in moments of like an oppression and angst and anger, right? I talked about that whole, Mothra is sleeping, but once our prayers reach her, she's sure to wake up and come save us. There's definitely in the Bible, and you can speak more to the Old Testament than I can, but this idea of praying out to God and where is he? Right. I mean, the Psalms are littered with that, of prayers of just like, Lord, don't forsake me. Please hear my cries. My enemies are overtaking me. And ultimately, the psalmist knows that God will deliver, but in that moment, deliverance isn't there, right? And we see that. We see this movie, the characters really just hold on to hope, whether it's the main character finding his brother and just defying the odds and doing whatever he has to do to find his brother, right? Or this idea that Mothra will come and save the islanders from slavery, which realistically, I mean, people had already been killed. They tried escaping. There's this huge giant crab in the ocean that's going to kill them. So like, they don't really have a lot of reason to hope, but Dio doesn't lose that hope. She's willing to keep praying that Mothra does listen, because the thing is, and this idea of faith that a lot of people have it's just wishful thinking, right? Matthew Bass talks about that and, Salvation by Allegiance Alone, where if you view faith as just, I want something and I'm going to hope for it, what are you going to do? You're just going to sit around and wait. And that's not the biblical example of what faith is, right? It's this idea of, okay, I know I have this trust in something that is unshakable and unmovable, and that's God. And I'm going to go out there and I'm going to walk in that confidence, knowing that who he is, that he is going to order my steps. He is going to make all paths straight, right? And that's what we see, is we see characters that their hope isn't just in some whimsical, flimsy thing, and their decisions, like, I mean, again, the main character, like he's doing everything he can, to the extent of setting a stolen yacht to sail on the open sea while people are sleeping. Like, he steals this boat to find his brother. Like, he's just not messing around at all.
Right. Yeah, I think there's a huge thing in a lot of, I think, I obviously can't say every religion, but there's a lot of synergy in most religions that I'm familiar with, in terms of it's not just like chill and wait for God to act, but that God has in different ways depending on the system, it wants to do that work with humans. And to go to the Christian perspective, you said go to the Old Testament, but I'm actually going to take us to the New. So you've got N.T. Wright and one of his students who argue that Romans 8, when it talks about God works out everything for the good who loves them, he argues that the Greek really kind of better says God works along with those who love him to turn everything to the good. So you've got all of this, like, there is this faith aspect, but it's like, what does God want to do with us? What does God want to do through us? And it was the same, at least in the Old Testament. And it can't talk more to like other Jewish sects in the future, but the Old Testament has that same, like, God's doing something, but it's through us. I think you see that in early Islam too. Like, Allah has this plan and it's going to happen through his human subjects. That's why we struggle. That's why we have that identity with him. So I think this really kind of reflects a lot of mainstream views of God. It's not just that, like, good luck, but it's like, what can I do to kind of be a part of this process?
Yeah.
And of course, there's still the divine interference. I mean, they find this happens to be where Godzilla's chilling in a mountain. So, like, there's the randomness, but we also look at this and like, what do we do? How can we be part of this?
Yeah. Yeah, and there's an element of divine timing, right? Because I mean, think about it, if they would have, if Daiya would have come across Godzilla, or any of them would have come across Godzilla before that, you know, would they have done? There's just all these things that fall into place, and of course, yes, we're talking about a scripted movie, but I mean, anything in life. I think about, you know, when Harlow was born, with this whole COVID-19 thing. Obviously, I'm not happy that happened. But if like Harlow would have been born at any other point in the world, in history, and still had the same complications, like, I would not have been able to be at the hospital and afford to be at the hospital without, you know, being laid off and getting the unemployment and all these things. Like, I'm not saying it's good that happened, but the timing there is just like, it could not have been better in that sense. And there's so many things here where you're talking about N.T. Wright. You know, he would argue that when it talks about faith, when we see in the New Testament, a lot of times it's really the faithfulness of God, right? Not necessarily we have this hope in God, but we're putting our trust in a God who is always faithful. And for the Infant Island natives, they've always trusted Mothra, even if we've seen in like Mothra versus Godzilla, they may not understand Mothra's heart. They may not understand what her will is. They still have faith in her. So when I'm talking about like the idea of prayers of the oppressed and all that, I think back to, you know, even in the Civil War, like, you know, black slaves were not waiting for white people to slave them. They took things into their own hands, right? You know, they had the Underground Railroad. They were teaching themselves the Bible. All of these things, like, they took their own freedom into their own hands. And in the civil rights movement, I mean, of course, yes, black leaders wanted to see their white brothers and sisters join them in that battle. But even Martin Luther King's like, I can't wait for you guys to do the right thing. You know, that's so I think of those moments where in history with the black church, it's always been, and I'm not speaking obviously from experience, but just, you know, the writings that I've read and just, you know, from my friends that have spoken on it, is just when those prayers come out to the Lord, it's always for deliverance, but it's also with a definitiveness that honestly, like, I rarely see in like a white church, right? Because again, it's our faith is so, it's so like, it's not tangible. It's not rooted to anything solid. It's just, again, wishful thinking. We haven't really felt that need. Like, maybe yes, we're crying out to the Lord for help, but we're not actually, like, a lot of us have never been in that point of actual, like, needing deliverance and needing freedom. And when you
Mhm.
have those experiences, your prayers look a lot different. So I
Right.
don't know. Just watching that movie, it was just interesting, like, seeing for the first time in a while the divinity element coming back in and what that had to do with the natives. Because this is the first time that we've actually seen the Shobijin are always the ones who are like captured or whatever, right? This is the first time where we've actually seen the infant island natives be the captives.
Yeah. I did notice somewhere in the notes you said this is the first movie that takes place on an island.
Yeah.
And I'm like, isn't Japan an island? But
A tropical island.
so here's my question. Just broadly, if this movie did star King Kong instead of Godzilla, would how would the conversation shift? Would we even be having the same conversation?
Mhm.
Would we care that it doesn't have a thesis statement? And can I tack any more questions on the end of this list?
Oh, I'm sure you could. Because I will, because we have Jay St. G who pretty much asks us a lot of the same questions.
Oh,
Um,
thank you, Jay.
yeah. So I'll add his questions on, but I think, that's a great way to end the episode here. Because he asked, he's like, do you think that Ebirah would have been a better movie if it starred King Kong, like it was originally written for, or do you like the movie as is? Yeah, I don't think the conversation would be the same because I don't think people. I'll be honest, like, even though a lot of people love kaiju films, the King Kong movies have never been as popular. So I don't think, at least in this fandom, so I don't think the conversation really would be happening. Like, it it's funny, up until about a year ago, most people wrote off King Kong vs. Godzilla as being one of the silliest movies in the entries in the series because they only watched the American version. Because most people, that was the only one you could see legally
Mhm.
until the Criterion collection came out and showed the Japanese one. People were like, oh, wow, this is actually a good movie, right? People just wrote it off because the suit looked funky and all that stuff. As we get into King Kong Escapes, yeah, it's a fun movie, but like, it's not really one people talk about at all. So I think if it was King Kong, I mean, yeah, I don't think we would be having this conversation at all. Um, I like the movie as it is. I think tonally it would make more sense if it was King Kong,
Mhm.
but knowing what comes after this, I'm glad it was Godzilla because some of these movies coming after this are some of my favorites. So, like, yeah, I'm absolutely fine with the changes that were made. So, what about you?
Yeah, I kind of look at this at the same. I look at this as the same level as like Gamera and the Space Women. Like, if it's bad, it's oh well. It's a curiosity. Like if it was King Kong instead of Godzilla, if it was bad, we just don't have to think about it again. But
Mhm.
I could see in terms of a King Kong movie that when King Kong doesn't really have, as far as I know, doesn't have as many thesis statements, that to release the movie without any overriding theme is fine. So I was just really curious if you just straight up replaced it. Um, I think there'd be so many fewer problems and so much less to talk about. So
Yeah.
in the long run, it's probably okay that we got this way.
Yeah, and I think that goes back to it's interesting how little they changed, even though they changed monsters, right? You would have assumed, okay, well, since it's Godzilla, you know, why would there still have to be that not like love interest, right? But then it just kind of makes me think how much had they not recorded, how much had they filmed before that change was made? Because obviously they didn't make a new suit for him, right? So
Hmm.
my thought is it is pretty last minute. Uh, but yeah, I don't know. I mean, you say there would be less problems, but God, I mean, look at how ugly the Kong suit is. Like that in itself is a problem. So
Hmm.
it's man, that thing will forever haunt me. But yeah, I think it's I'm glad we got the movie for what it is. It's not. I hate that you have to say that a movie is not perfect, because if you say you love something, people are like, "But what about this and this?" I'm like, okay. I mean, my wife loves me. I'm not perfect. Like that's that's completely reasonable.
Mhm.
So when I say that, like, I do love this movie, of course I acknowledge its flaws, but I mean, this is just one of those Godzilla movies I could turn on anytime and be completely fine. Like, there's just something about these late 60s to 70s movies that are just, it's so much fun. I don't want to necessarily, you talk about Parasite, like I loved Parasite. It's not a movie I would just turn on,
No,
you know?
no, I agree.
It's no Hot Rod, that's for sure.
10 out of 10 favorite movies.
Yeah, Hot Rod. Hot Rod. God, I'm surprised I got 5 movies into it before someone's like, wait a minute, this seems weird. So, do you have any thoughts before we sign off this evening? Oh, wait a minute. I totally forgot. Do you know what time it is?
Peanut butter jelly time.
All right. I'll let you start.
My favorite death was the death of the Godzilla franchise. Oh wait, we just said this wasn't that. Gosh, I should have known this was coming, and I still didn't think much about it.
I'll go with the two the infant island people, the guys who escaped on the boat and they end up getting eaten by Ebirah. Like, that was so graphic. I was not like, when I watched that
Okay,
again for the
yeah.
first time in a while, I was like, oh
That
yeah,
kind of was, wasn't it? I was a little surprised there.
yeah.
Um,
So I pour one out to you, unnamed island natives.
Man, gosh. Okay, I hate to be that guy, but I want that too. You can have one and I'll take the other. It's funny that I forgot that though, because it is it was a little like not shocking, but not off-putting, but I was surprised. I was like, whoa, where does this come from?
Okay, if you're gonna do that, then I will do Giant Condor then, because he got roasted.
Yeah, true.
Which I did forget to mention. So if I remember right, that monster was actually taken from the old Rodan suit and they repurposed it as the Giant Condor.
Huh.
Yeah.
It is. We are kind of getting to the age, and I'm sure you're gonna be like, haha, just you wait. But like where these just are getting crammed full of monsters. And almost distractingly so.
Just wait till we get to destroy all monsters.
Well, but they're all gonna die in that one, right? Or are they not destroyed? Don't spoil it.
Yeah. It's let's just say the title is Ancient Near Eastern War Rhetoric.
2 other people are gonna laugh at that.
I know, that was a deep cut. Okay. So next week, the movie we are watching is
Son of Godzilla.
Yeah. How excited are you, Chris?
I was so excited.
Like, I don't think you guys realize how excited Chris really is for this.
This is like one of the 2 films we've been building towards.
Yeah.
Next episode is like the climax.
Yeah. Which, not to like spoil anything, but out of all of the Fukuda films, this is probably actually my favorite.
What, Son of Godzilla?
Oh yeah.
Oh heck yeah.
Yeah. I have no shame in admitting that.
I know, you named yourself that on my Netflix account.
I did. I did. I'm one of the like 5 people in the world who does not hate Menya. But yeah, it's a 1967 flick, Son of Godzilla. Yeah, I'm super excited. I think this is where I'll be really curious to see what people's comments are when I ask a question for our discussion next time. But
the question is, if J.J. Abrams directed The Rise of Godzilla, who would be Minya's mom?
I know what the Rule 34 people would say.
Oh no. Wait, did I just accidentally ask our listeners to ship?
You did.
Maybe it wasn't an accident.
You did. And this ship did not have any Ebirah juice, so we are now sank. Okay, guys.
Oh.
Thank you again for tuning in to this episode of the Kaiju Apostle podcast. If you tolerated what you heard, if you have a comment you'd like to share, or if you have a summons to court over the brain damage that we've caused, let us know over on Twitter or Instagram. Our handles for both are Kaiju Apostle Pod, or you can email us at contact the Kaiju Apostle. You know the drill. Contact at the Kaiju. Yeah. No, don't do that. You can also follow Chris on Twitter at Chris Worms. I'm gonna ask you each time. So, which Sentai are you watching now?
I'm still on Die Ranger because it's impossible for me to work at home and watch a subtitled show at the same time.
Yeah. Okay. So you should definitely chat with him on that. There's also been some cool Star Wars news too. So if you care about Star Wars, he's a go-to guy on that.
Or Animal Crossing.
Oh, Animal Crossing. Yeah, that too.
That was really a lot of my tweets this past week.
And then you guys know how the Apple reviews work. If you don't have a iTunes account, I get it. We also want to give another shout out though to the Monsters vs. Men guys. Before we close, they actually just had their last Godzilla episode. I think it's been like 40 episodes. They went through a movie each week. It was crazy. They're now moving on to Gamera. So wanted to give a shout out to you guys.
I pour one out for the Monsters vs. Men podcast.
Yeah. Yeah, because Gamera is a rough ride. It gets better, but it's rough. So
you've got the space women. Godzilla speed.
So yeah, this has been a fun episode. Looking forward to hearing from y'all, and have a great day / night / evening / whatever time it is. Yes, time is meaningless. Everything is meaningless.
The question is, if J.J. Abrams directed The Rise of Godzilla, who would be Minya's mom?
I know what the Rule 34 people would say.
Oh no. Wait, did I just accidentally ask our listeners to ship?
You did.